Hi folks, and welcome back to the Storming Cellar. Well, it looks like the U.S. is all in on supporting the war in Ukraine. The U.S. is now not only sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine, but also sending 31 sophisticated Abrams M1 tanks as well. Before we get to the story, remember, if you like the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Okay, we all know the war in Ukraine is escalating and unfortunately has the ability to get out of control really fast. So let's take a look at the president's announcement, and I'll give you my thoughts.
And today I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, the equivalent of 1 Ukrainian battalion. Secretary Austin has recommended this step because it will enhance the Ukraine's capacity to defend its territory and achieve its strategic objectives.
Alrighty then. We send the tanks and achieve strategic objective. What is our strategic objective? No one's told me yet. Is our objective to get Russia to the table for talks? I'm an inquiring mind, and I really want to know.
The Abrams tanks are the most capable tanks in the world. They're also extremely complex to operate and maintain. So we're also giving Ukraine the parts and equipment necessary to effectively sustain these tanks on the battlefield.
Giving the tanks parts and training. Okay. Is this a Lend-Lease agreement or a quid pro quo? What is the U.S. getting out of the deal? Security? It's not a NATO action. Seems more like a European or EU problem. I'm like, hey, give me a call when the Russian hordes scream into a NATO nation.
We'll begin to train the Ukrainian troops on these issues of sustainment, logistics, and maintenance as soon as possible.
Yes, the M1 tank is very sophisticated. Where will the training be conducted? The U.S., Europe, Ukraine? If Ukraine, that adds a whole new dimension to intervention and a real love loss from Russia.
We're also closely coordinated this announcement with our allies. The American contribution will be joined by an additional announcement, including that will be ready, available, and more easily integrated for use in the battlefield in the coming weeks and months from other countries.
Sorry, this does not compute.
I'm grateful to Chancellor Schultz for providing German Leopard 2 tanks and will lead an effort to organize a European contribution of 2 tank battalions for Ukraine.
I'm really glad to hear that Germany is stepping up to the plate and providing the Leopard 2 tanks.
And what we heard today is certainly not what we've been hearing in the past few weeks. Until basically a few days ago, the President of the United States had been saying that American Abrams tanks are not suitable for the battlefield in Ukraine. Today, of course, it was a different tune. How do we explain this 180?
An interesting question here. Is the NATO alliance finally getting together on heavy armor support for Ukraine? Is this a quid pro quo deal, or did the Germans force the U.S. to engage in more support because they didn't want to face the Russians alone? I'm sure they're still remembering June 1941 when they last pissed off the Russians.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question, which is highly debated. It was not only the president himself who said they are not the best weapons to be sent or the best tanks to be sent over to Ukraine. They are too heavy, they are too complicated to maneuver, and after all, they need jet fuel and not diesel fuel, which is difficult to provide on the battlefield.
This doesn't make sense, considering the M1 was built for combat against the Soviets in Europe and can maneuver like a dang sports car. Too heavy for what? Too complicated possibly means it will require U.S. advisors training Ukrainians while in combat. Not good. Jet fuel? The Ukrainians have jet fuel, but yeah, that could possibly be problematic. But apparently not if the Biden administration has decided to send the tanks to them anyway. Something just isn't tracking here, folks. Nonetheless, the U.S. is sending the top-of-the-line, third-generation M1A2 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. The UK is sending 14 Challenger tanks, and of course the Germans are sending 11 of its Leopard 2 tanks. The Ukrainians say they need 100 tanks to offset the Russian T-72 threat. These M1 tanks have greater lethality, survivability, and better cannons, guns, and armor than the T-72. With their suspension system, they can fire while on the run as well and can hit a target up to 4 times further than the T-72. 2,000 M1A2 tanks deployed to Operation Desert Storm, and none were destroyed by Iraqi T-72 Babylon Lion tanks. Now, the Russians are hurrying development of their new T-14 Armata main battle tank, which was mothballed decades ago. And they're going to be sending that to Ukraine. Intelligence sources believe it may be pressed into service way before it's ready and could be a very faulty tank. Okay, without getting too much into detail, what is the Abrams M1 tank and what kind of logistics and training is required to operate it effectively? The tanks will cost $10 million to include training and logistics, spare parts, and all that for an extended period. So this deal will cost someone an estimated $310 million. It'll take approximately 22 weeks to train a crew to operate the M1 at the basic level. The 31 tanks are essentially a battalion size for Ukraine. And finally, the White House says it may take up to a year for the full transfer of tanks to occur. A lot can happen in a year, believe me. Naturally, I have to put a plug in for air power. The Russians will deploy the Su-25 Frogfoot, a Soviet version of the A-10 Warthog, but it's without technology or system upgrades. Fortunately for the Ukrainians, the U.S. is providing them with 2 Patriot missile batteries, which might help a great deal with the air threat. This is definitely something the commanders need to be considering while on the battlefront. My final question is the West quickly reaching a point of no return in Ukraine? Russian Deputy Chairman of the Security Council and former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev recently stated Russia is willing to use nukes if Ukraine feels they're losing the war. So is it just me, or are we seeing a lot of weapons transfers, but not much from the U.S. State Department in making headway in bringing Russia to any kind of peace talks? And in fact, the more the U.S. talks of sending advanced weapons to Ukraine, the more it seems Russia's digging their heels in. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to help it grow. Also, let me know what you think about the M1s going to Ukraine. So until next time, make sure your takeoff and landings equal.